Great. Right. So, good morning, welcome. As Stefano said, my name is Simon Ritter. I work as the Deputy CTO at Azure Systems. What we're going to talk about this morning is some big changes that are happening in terms of Java. And we're not talking so much about technical changes this time. We're talking about changes in terms of the way the platform is developed, in terms of the way the platform is delivered, and more importantly, the way that updates to individual releases are delivered as well. Now, what I'd like to do is to start the presentation by asking you, the audience, a question so that we can get an idea of what people are doing. So the question is, how quickly do you move to a new release of Java? So hopefully, we can see that the poll comes up now. And the answers I've given you are, firstly, for the people who are ahead of the curve. So we deploy it in production before it's released. Second option is as soon as the release is generally available, so release comes out, you think it's good enough. Third option, we wait for a few updates to ensure stability of the platform. Any issues are worked out, so you've got some confidence in what you're deploying on. Fourth option is when public updates for the previous release end. So this is more the case where you're forced to move to a new release. And the fifth option is a little bit facetious, but what you mean there are new versions of Java. So I'll give people just a few more seconds and then we'll close the poll and we'll have a look at the results. So we hopefully will see the results. And I hear somebody clicking. Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Right, so this is interesting because this looks very much like the results from the webinar that I did this morning in Europe. So nobody says that they deploy in production before it's released, and that's a good thing because nobody should be deploying something which is effectively in beta before it's available and has been fully tested. 10% of the audience are saying that they go for as soon as generally available. Okay, those are the sort of like the people on the leading edge, the people who are very brave. Majority of people are the people who wait for a few updates, make sure everything's stable. And then about a quarter of the people, which is pretty much exactly the same number as Europe, when updates are stopped, and so they have to move to a new version. And then probably there's one or two people there who think there isn't a new, or there are new versions of Java. Okay, so we'll return now to the slides, and we'll start talking about what's changing. So to start with, let's look at what Java has been like until now. So what we're used to in terms of the delivery of the JDK, in terms of the delivery of updates, and how we use those, because that will help you to understand how significant the changes are going to be when we talk about what's happening in the future. So the first thing is that Java is now pretty much 23 years old. And so it's been through a number of development phases. We're up to JDK 10 now, so 10 different versions, and there've been a few point releases in between that as well. And the thing is that development of these releases takes time. If we look at the history of this, what we find is that in terms of the time between JDK 5 and JDK 6, it was a little bit over 2 years. So, that's not too bad. 2 years is sort of reasonable sort of time for a big platform to move forward. JDK 7 came out 4 years and 8 months after JDK 6. Now, that's a little bit skewed because if you think about JDK 7, it wasn't a huge change in terms of technology. There weren't lots of new features. So it wasn't technical reasons that delayed JDK 7 for so long after JDK 6. Many of the reasons for that time was because of the fact that Oracle acquired Sun. There were a number of issues around the JCP and getting the JSRs organized and things like that. So some of that was down to the issues around Java, not just the technical things. JDK 8 came out 2 years and 8 months after JDK 7, so a little bit longer than between 5 and 6. Fair number of big new features, lambdas and streams, so wanted to get that right. And then JDK 9, 3 years and 6 months, 3.5 years from JDK 8. And the reason that was quite long was because of modularity. And if you followed Java, you'll know that there were some delays in JDK 9 because modularity had a number of issues and people wanted to make sure they got it right before they released it. So as we can see, we're talking about years here, several years in one case, certainly 2 years or more for all the changes between JDK 5 and JDK 9. Now, the next thing that we need to consider is that in terms of being able to migrate to a new version of the platform, in the past, we've been given plenty of time to continue with the old release before we have to move to the new release. So this kind of comes back to the poll that we just did and seeing, who waits for a few releases, or at least waits for a few updates before they move to the next platform. And again, if we look at JDK 6, there were actually, once JDK 6 came out, there were nearly 3 years of public updates to JDK 5 before they stopped. That meant you had nearly 3 years to migrate from JDK 5 to JDK 6. Lots of time to evaluate it, lots of time to look at the stability and things like that. And, JDK 6 was not a big feature release. There weren't a lot of features in there that would have affected compatibility. JDK 7, okay, getting a little bit less time for the overlap of updates, but you still had over 1.5 years, nearly 2 years from the release of JDK 7 before you had to move off JDK 6. Again, lots of time to evaluate, lots of time to test. JDK 8, okay, so now it's getting a little bit shorter, but you still got over 1 year of public updates before you had to move off JDK 7 to move to JDK 8. So this is quite important because what it allows you to do is to ensure that the platform you're moving to has stabilized. If big new features are being added that potentially could affect stability, need to be tested, not just in terms of by Oracle in the lab, in the sort of production environment. What you really want to do is test it where people are using it for real applications. And so this is where we see the need to have that overlap. If we're talking about the Java platform today, there are 3 words that we can use to describe it. So the first is stable. A 23-year-old platform, it's absolutely rock solid. There's lots of testings being done, millions of people use it in very big applications, very small applications, and because of that, the developers have been able to make sure that it's absolutely rock solid. They address any issues very quickly. There are updates which provide bug fixes and so on, all very good to make a stable platform. It's secure right from the very beginning. Java was designed as a network programming language. You could move code around the network, so you needed to make it secure to avoid potential issues. From then, there's also been a lot of work done on security and making sure that Java as a platform continues to be very secure. Even if there are issues that come up in terms of maybe protocols that are used where issues are identified, those can be addressed through security updates which are issued at a very regular pace. So we've got a stable, we've got a secure platform. And at the moment, we have a free platform. So you can go to oracle.java.com and you can download the JDK for free. You don't have to pay to use it. If you're using the latest version, then you can get it. You can get updates to that, and it's all completely free. Great. Now let's look at how the development of the JDK is going to change. And this relates to a number of announcements that Oracle made in September last year, a couple of weeks before Java 1. The first of these is that they want to switch to a new release model. Rather than this several years between releases, they have decided that there is going to be a release of the JDK every 6 months. JDK 9 was released in September of last year. This year, we have a release in March, which was JDK 10, and we'll have a release in September, which will be JDK 11. So we're moving to a 6-month release cadence, and every 6 months, there will be a new JDK. The reason for this is that Oracle want to move the development of the JDK away from a much slower process to a more agile way of doing things. This is much more the way that people are developing software now. It's a way of adapting more quickly to changing requirements. It's a way of delivering new functionality much more quickly. And they want to use that for the JDK itself. The previous target that they had was a release every 2 years. And as we've seen from the slide I showed you, they only once came close to matching that, but they've exceeded that in several cases. So 2 years wasn't going to work. The problem was that the way that things were driven was by features. Once a JDK release was made, planning was started for the next one. And the way that that planning ran was to say, okay, which features are we going to put in there? Decide on a set of features and then develop them. Only when all those features are developed does that particular release go out the door. And this is why we saw 3.5 years between JDK 8 and JDK 9, because modularity wasn't finished, needed more time, and so they had to delay the release. The way that things work now with the new release cadence is that rather than planning a set of features for a specific release, you invert that. And so you say, whatever's ready when we need to release a particular JDK, that's what goes into that release. If something isn't ready, it gets delayed. It goes into the next release or another release later than that if it needs more time. So that way, you simply release whatever's available at that time. It means you get a smaller number of features, but it means you get a regular, predictable time for when things are actually going to go out the door. The next thing to understand is about the availability of updates to the JDK. Now, these have kind of switched more recently since the Oracle acquisition of Sun to pretty much a 3-month release cadence. So every 3 months, there's an update to Oracle in terms of bug fixes and security patches. Because of the change to a 6-month release cadence for the JDK, Oracle were faced with quite a problematic situation, which is that if they wanted to continue to offer updates, they were going to have a problem of needing to port fixes and security patches, potentially to like 6 or even 8 versions of the JDK, because they're going to be so close together. That wasn't going to work in practice. It was going to be too much in terms of resources and just too difficult to do. So what they've said is, in the same way that other software providers, people like Ubuntu do, they're going to use a long-term support model. And the way that works is that every 3 years, they will decide that one of the releases is going to be a long-term support release. Long-term support release at the moment is JDK 8. They decided that because JDK 8 was the one that was kind of available at that time. It's one that lots of people are using and want to continue to use. So it makes sense to sort of synchronize on JDK 8. The next long-term support release is going to be JDK 11, which will come out in September of this year. We also need to consider about the availability of binaries, because this has changed slightly as well. Prior to about September of last year, what we've had is the traditional Oracle, and some before that, branded binary. You could go to java.oracle.com and there will be a list of different platforms with JDKs available, and you could download that once you'd accepted the Oracle binary code license. Oracle binary code license is a very standard license that Oracle use, and from a Java perspective, it has certain restrictions, most notably the field of use restriction. This was something that was introduced by Sun when they were still making money from the mobile phone side of things, and they wanted to force people to pay a license fee if they were going to use it in embedded applications or mobile applications. So if you want to use Java on the desktop, if you want to use Java on the server, then it's completely free. If you want to embed it into a single purpose device, so that could be a kiosk even, then you need to discuss with Oracle about a license and paying the licensing fee for that. More recently, Oracle are now producing a second binary, or second set of binaries, I should say. These are under the Open JDK project. And if you go to jdk.java.net, you can download a binary from there as well. What you get there is a license, which is the GPL v2 license with the class path exception. That's a less restrictive one than the Oracle binary code license, so you can pretty much use your code anywhere. So you can put it on an embedded device, no problem at all. The key thing about the OpenJDK binaries are that it is quite clearly stated that there will only be updates, security bug fixes, for 6 months. So only for the current release of the JDK. When the next release comes out, updates to the previous version will stop. As I said, because of the 3-month release cycle for these, there is basically 2 updates. Key thing here is there's no overlap of updates with the previous version. So if you're going to use the OpenJDK binaries, in order to get more updates, new updates, you will need to move to the next version in order to get those updates. There won't be any for the previous version. Oracle has also decided that to streamline their processes and to make their life easier, they're going to reduce the number of platforms that they support. This is from JDK 9 onwards. What they've said is that not many people use 32-bit operating systems anymore. This is really very much the legacy side of things. And certainly for JDK 9 and onwards, they don't see anybody deploying newer JDKs onto these very old platforms. What they've said then is there will be no more binaries for 32-bit Windows, no more binaries for 32-bit Linux. They've also decided that they don't want to provide binaries for the embedded market. They basically said that they're not interested in that anymore. So no more ARM binaries, either 32-bit or 64-bit. What they will provide is 4 different flavors: Windows, Linux, Mac, and Solaris Spark, all 64-bit only. Another thing which is significant is that more things from the Oracle JDK, which were closed source, are going to be open sourced. And the thing is that if you look at the Oracle JDK, it contains a number of features which are not included in the OpenJDK. OpenJDK is the reference implementation source code for the Java SE standard. So if you compile it and you build it, that will be conforming to the Java SE standard. But Oracle have offered a number of other features which are outside of that standard. 2 of the most notable ones that are in the Oracle JDK are Flight Recorder and Mission Control, tools that you can use to monitor your application, record information about performance, tracking what's going on in your application, and so on. They've been quite popular, and so now they're going to be open sourced. The source code will be moved into the OpenJDK project. So you'll be able to build those and use them if you want to. The goal for this is to eliminate any functional differences between the Oracle JDK and the JDK binary that you can build from the OpenJDK source. So the idea is that there will be nothing different in terms of functionality. You'll have exactly the same whether you use the OpenJDK version or whether you use the Oracle version. Target for this is late this year. I suspect that what they're really targeting in terms of that is JDK 11, which will be in September. You can already see that in JDK 10, things like the application class data sharing, which was a commercial feature in the Oracle JDK, has now been included in OpenJDK already. So they're moving towards that as we kind of see going forward. Now, the other thing that's really quite significant in terms of JDK 9 was a shift in the approach to how the JDK changes moving forward. Up until now, we've had 23 years of Java development, and over that time, lots of things have been added. So this is great because there's not lots of new features. We've had literally thousands of classes added to the core class libraries. We've had features like the ability to support JavaScript from the JVM. We've had the inclusion of a new bytecode. We've had the inclusion of new tools and so on. Lots of things, all been added to Java. Nothing really has been deleted from Java up until now. And so JDK 9, the decision was made that because these 23 years, all these things have been added, some of them are now so old that they don't really make sense to include anymore. So we need to do some housekeeping. We need to clean up some of the things which really aren't being used by anybody anymore. And that's what JDK 9 started. So some deprecated APIs were removed for the first time. As I said, up until JDK 9, lots of things have been deprecated. In fact, there are over 300 elements, classes, interfaces, methods, and so on, which have been deprecated. But until now, nothing have been removed. JDK 9 started very gently by removing 6 methods and 1 class. And they were quite obscure, certainly an obscure class, quite obscure methods. So very few people were going to be affected by that. JDK 10 removed a whole package, a further 6 classes, 9 methods, and 1 field. So a little bit more being removed. Again, some fairly esoteric things, but it will affect some people who've written code that use those things and need to move to later versions of JDK. Some redundant features have been eliminated. There's some tooling around the JHAT tool. There's the JVM tools interface, HProf agent have been removed. The demos and sample applications, they all got deleted as well. And a number of deprecated garbage collection options were removed in JDK 9. So things like the incremental concurrent mark sweep algorithm went away. The ability to use the parallel new with serial old collector went away, and some other things as well. There were significant changes in terms of command line options. This is something that has kind of, again, grown and grown over time. So in JDK 9, 50 of the -XX flags were removed from the JVM. So there were 50 options, a lot of them related to tracing and printing of different things. And because the logging framework was changed in JDK 9, that affected a lot of options. But I did the analysis on JDK 10 last week, and it turns out in JDK 10, 366 -XX flags were removed. So that's a huge number when you think of what's being affected here. So these are things that are going to affect compatibility. This housekeeping is going to continue. So we'll see that in the future, especially JDK 11, these things have already been announced, that certain things are being removed. Applet support is pretty much gone in JDK 11. The browser plugin is going, Java Web Start is going. These are things which, as I say, are outside of the standard. So it's been decided that very few people are still using applets, and they should move to a different way of deploying their applications. So support is being dropped in JDK 11. JavaFX is a separate graphics library, never been part of the standard, has its own open source project. So that again is being removed from JDK 11. Possibly more significantly is the removal of a meta module. So not just a module, but a meta module. And this is java.se.ee, which contains 6 individual modules. So one of those is Corba. And as I say, this is where you look back 20 years and you think, okay, 20 years ago, some people were using Corba. Very few people still use Corba. I'm pretty sure nobody is developing any new applications that use Corba. Other modules here are things that work with web services. So we're talking about SOAP-based web services here rather than RESTful web services. Again, very few people use those. And so the decision has been made to retire a lot of the modules that are used for that. The idea is that some of this might change even further in the future. So the CMS garbage collector has been suggested as something that may go at a later date, maybe in 13, 14, 15, who knows? Because of the G1 collector, CMS collector is sort of like a duplicate of that, but not as good in terms of performance, so that may go. Other things may get deleted as well. The key point here is that moving forward, compatibility is not going to be guaranteed. This used to be the thing that we could rely on very heavily with Java. Yeah, there were a few places where things didn't quite get made compatible. We had to make some changes that did introduce incompatibilities. But overall, you were fairly certain if you're using standard class libraries, then moving from version N to version N+1 wasn't going to cause you a lot of problems. That's not necessarily the way things are going to work moving forward. JDK 9, JDK 10, JDK 11 have already started this process, and it's going to continue in the future. Oracle have said that they will potentially introduce changes that break backwards compatibility. They have also said that they will give you a warning of this. So anything that they want to remove will be deprecated first. So you'll get deprecation warnings when you try to use these features. They've said they will give you a minimum of one release warning. Couldn't really give you a minimum of less than one release, but they'll give you a minimum of one release warning, which could be as little as 6 months. So if you've got a feature that you're using and you need to move to the next JDK, you could get as little as 6 months notice that you have to potentially substantially change your application to make it work. Now, let's try and eliminate some confusion, because I've spoken to a lot of people at conferences, different customers, people who use Java, and a lot of what's been said already has caused confusion about what the reality is moving forward. So Oracle have been very clear about this, and they've said they want to use the long-term support model, and there will be a long-term support release every 3 years. That's very clear. The important thing is that does not mean that that LTS version is going to have 3 years of free updates. Many people seem to think that's the case. It is not. There will not be 3 years of free updates. There will be 6 months of free updates until the next JDK comes out. So in the case of JDK 11, it's a long-term support release. It will have updates for 6 months until JDK 12 comes out, unless you are an Oracle commercial support customer. So LTS updates from JDK 11 onwards, because JDK 8 is a little bit different, will only be available to people with a commercial support contract with Oracle or potentially with other people. Similarly, the only free version of JDK 11 and later will be the open JDK binaries. And again, Oracle have stated this, that you will still be able to download the Oracle JDK from their website, but you will not be able to deploy it into production. You'll be able to develop with it, you'll be able to test with it, but you will not be able to deploy it into production with the Oracle JDK unless you have a commercial support contract with them. If you want to continue to receive free updates to the JDK, which is very important, then you must update your JDK every 6 months, because you're going to be using the open JDK binaries in order to get the free updates for 6 months, but then you have to move to the next one in order to get future updates. No more overlap of updates. Because you move to the next release, there is no continuation of updates for previous versions. So I want people to take some time to think about that. It's very important to understand this, because it's going to have potentially a big impact on how you deploy your applications and how you can use Java as a platform and maintain stability and maintain security. Desktop Java users are already seeing this. Now, I've updated my laptop to the latest version of JDK 8, and this is the message that I got. And it said that there are important changes coming which will impact access to future releases of Java SE from Oracle. Corporate users will be impacted as soon as January 2019. And that's because, again, things are changing with JDK 8 and free updates as of January 2019. So this is kind of the important slide that we need to look at here. This is based on the information that Oracle have provided. And what it shows is the availability of updates. The orange blocks are the ones that show availability of updates only for people using the Oracle JDK who have a commercial support contract. So at the moment, things like JDK 6 and JDK 7 have already gone beyond the availability of public updates. So anything for JDK 6 and JDK 7 is under a support contract anyway. JDK 6 will stop even commercial support from Oracle as of the end of this year. JDK 8 has been extended in terms of free updates until January of next year, so free up until then. After that, updates will be available, but they'll only be usable by non-commercial users. If you're a commercial enterprise, you will not be able to use those updates within your organization. You will need a commercial support contract to use those. For JDK 10, updates are available for free. Once we get to JDK 11, the long-term support release, then the Oracle binaries, as I said, will only be available for use in a commercial production environment under a commercial support agreement with Oracle. Free JDKs are now only going to be through the Open JDK binaries. And so already we have version 9 binaries, we have version 10 binaries. When we go to 11, there will be JDK 11 binaries, but the updates will only be until JDK 12. For future updates, you'll need to move to JDK 12, get updates for that, move to JDK 13, get updates for that, and so on. So we talked earlier on about 3 words we can use to describe the Java platform: stable, secure, free. This is still true. Nothing has changed in that respect. But what you need to do when you're deciding on how to migrate to a new version of Java is select which 2 of these you want, because you can only have 2 out of 3, not 3 out of 3 anymore, only 2 out of 3. Think about it. If you want to have a stable platform, which is free, then you can do that. You can continue to use JDK 8 indefinitely. If your application runs on JDK 8, you can continue to use it. But once we get to January 2019, you will no longer get updates, which means no more security patches, which means potentially you will have security issues with your platform. If you want to have security and you want to be free, you can do that. You can move to the next JDK every time a new JDK comes out. You can take the updates to that, and you will continue to get security fixes. So you can be secure. You can do that for free using the Open JDK binaries. But you will sacrifice stability because, of course, there are potentially backward compatibility changes which will break backwards compatibility. There are potentially new features being added that may take time to stabilize. So you're kind of making a leap of faith, moving to a new JDK and assuming that it will be completely stable and won't affect your application. If you want to be stable and secure, you can do that, but you're going to have to pay for it. You won't be able to get the free updates anymore. You'll need a commercial support contract. So let's just briefly look at what Azul is doing in terms of our Zulu Java. So Zulu JDK is the binaries that we build from the Open JDK. We take the source code from the Open JDK project, we run it through the standard build scripts, we generate binaries, and then we run the TCK tests on those. So we guarantee that all the tests have run and passed, and what we're delivering is something that conforms completely to the Java SE standard. We have quite a wide range of JDK versions available. We actually go all the way back to JDK 6, then 7, 8, 9, and 10 at the moment. 11, obviously, when it comes out, we'll support that as well. We also provide wider platform support. We've seen that there are some customers who still do want availability of 32-bit operating system support, and so we have both Windows and Linux versions of Intel 32-bit available. For those people who are looking to deploy Java into embedded applications, then we have both ARM 32 and 64-bit versions available, and we also support PowerPC if you would like that. These are available from our website. You can go to download Zulu, and they are completely free. Now, what we're also doing is offering commercial support. So if you want to ensure that you're going to get security patches beyond the end of the free availability, then we've come up with a plan which is offering 3 different ways of doing that under a support contract. So the first of those is using the same long-term support model that that Oracle have. So for JDK 11, JDK 8, JDK 17, when it finally comes out, we will be offering long-term support for that, so multiple years of support. We're also going to have a medium-term support. And the idea behind this is that if you want to move to a version which is between the long-term support, so if you don't want to wait 3 years for the version because there's some feature that you need, then we're going to select one of the versions between the LTS releases and offer medium-term support on that. So that will give you 18 months of support beyond the next LTS release date. And that's where you're starting to see this idea of having overlap so that you've got the chance to be able to migrate in the time that makes sense for you, got the ability to watch things stabilize and make sure everything works the way you want it to. And then even for the remaining ones, the ones that are effectively short-term support, these we will offer extended support for. So we will offer extended support by 6 months in terms of updates and fixes, and then a further 6 months of you can call us if you have a problem with it. 6 months of extended support. So the idea is to give a very flexible support model that enables people to do what they want and what makes sense for their business in terms of migrating to new applications or new platforms. So just to summarize then, Java is changing, not just technically. So we're seeing a faster delivery of new features, 6-month release cadence, new JDK every 6 months. Very important to understand that long-term support does not mean long-term free updates. Also very important to understand that there's no more overlap of updates. So you can't rely on being able to use an older version whilst you migrate to a newer version. Azul can help. We have extended support available on all releases. The idea is to ease the migration path for applications. We want to help you move to JDK versions, move to the Java platform versions that make sense for your deployments, for your applications in a way that makes sense for you. The other thing I'd like to say is that in terms of what we're offering is not just backporting fixes, not just making the standard fixes available, but we also do have a full support functionality available. So if there are problems that you find with the JDK which are not being addressed through the Open JDK, we can actually diagnose those problems and provide fixes, provide binaries that have those fixes in them so that you can get your application up and running again and avoid problems with that. So with that, I would like to say thank you very much. And now we'll have a look and see whether we have any questions. So if I go to here, right, okay. So question is, what do you think of Oracle's recent removal of download sponsor program? So this is, I think you're referring to the, what was it, the toolbar that used to be a part of the JRE. I think this is part of what they're trying to do to simplify things in terms of making sure that the Oracle JDK and the binary built from the Open JDK is the same. So there's no encumbrances and things like that. Second question, why do long-term support for any JDK version beyond, or why do you do long-term support for any JDK version beyond Oracle? How many Java engineers do you have? Well, we actually have quite a lot of Java engineers. I think in terms of the number of people we have in our company, there's about 80 Java engineers. And a lot of our engineers are people who have very in-depth experience of Java. So we've hired a lot of people who have worked on the JVM, who worked on the development of the JDK. So we do have a serious background in terms of delivering support for Java. I think it's safe to say that we can fix problems if we come across them. Just curious if you know why they didn't switch to Ubuntu style numbering. Yes. Well, they did try. So they tried to move to a numbering scheme that would have used 18.3 for what was JDK 10, 18.9 for JDK 11. And that just proved to be really unpopular. A lot of people in the Java community didn't like that idea and they didn't think it would work. So they abandoned that idea and moved back to just calling it JDK 10, JDK 11, and then having update numbers associated with that. What is a Zulu model embedding the JDK in a container for distribution? Yep, that works completely. So you can take the Zulu JDK, you can build a runtime, you can use JLink, create a runtime specific to your application, and you can put it into a Docker container. There's absolutely no problem with doing that. In fact, we have Docker images that you can use for that, so no problem doing that. Next question, how does Zing fit into all of this? Okay, so Zing is a completely separate product line for us. Zing is our commercial JVM, where we take the OpenJDK source, we remove all of the garbage collection algorithms, we replace it with a C4 algorithm that does things differently. We also remove the C2 JIT compiler and replace it with our Falcon version, and then we compile it, we run it against TCK to make sure everything is good, and then we license it in a completely different way. So Zing is a commercial JVM which is targeted at applications that need low latency and high throughput, where you're looking for something which does more than the standard hotspot compiler, and you have specific requirements for that, which we license differently. Zulu is very much the idea of commercial support of the standard product. Is this presentation available by download? At the moment, it's not. We will be sending you a copy of the slides after the presentation in the next few days. We'll also be sending you a copy of or a link to the presentation itself. I will put these slides up on SlideShare probably tomorrow morning, my time. I'm in London. And then I'll, if you have a look on my SlideShare account, Speak Java, then you'll be able to find it there. Okay. Is Swing support being dropped the same as JavaFX? No, nothing has been said that Swing is being dropped. JavaFX, because it's not part of the Java SE standard, is something that can be very easily removed from the JDK because it's not required to conform with Java SE. Swing is part of the standard libraries, so unless the Java SE specification is changed, then Swing has to be part of the Open JDK and therefore part of the JDK that's built. Right. Will Zing keep up with JDK releases? Yes, it will. We probably, in fact, I'm certain we won't be releasing Zing for every version of the JDK. So we're doing a version of Zing for JDK 10 at the moment, but it's unlikely that we'll actually keep up with every release. More likely we'll be doing the same thing in terms of long-term support releases, because a lot of our customers don't need an update every 6 months. They're looking for stability, so we'll do less frequent updates. But yes, we will be adding new features to Zing to keep it up to date with the way the JDK is changing, but just not quite at the same rate that the Open JDK is changing. Next question. What do you feel the impact of increased pace of releases will have on tools and applications, Cassandra, Hazelcast, etc.? Yes, so libraries, frameworks, IDEs, tools, all of those things are facing basically a lot more work because they have to keep up with these changes. And especially people like IDE manufacturers, they need to make sure that they support all these new features, which are happening every 6 months. And that means they've got to come out with an update for their IDE every 6 months to enable developers to use those new features. Libraries can be a little bit slower because they don't necessarily change the library to use those new features. They just need to test the library or the framework with the new version of the JDK. So it's a little bit easier for them, but certainly tools and IDEs will require more frequent updates and more work to keep up to date with these things. So I think that's the last question I can see there. So what I'm going to do there is I'm going to close the webinar and I'm going to say thank you very much for listening.